So a question I get all the time is how do composers living today make money? Especially composers whose primary focus is to write for the concert hall rather than film, television, and video games. Now, if you're new here, my name is Saad Haddad, and I've recently graduated from Columbia University's doctorate program in music composition. Before that, I was doing my master's at Juilliard, and before even that, I was doing my bachelor's at the University of Southern California. Now, at all these places, money seemed to always be a taboo subject that was never discussed in any detail with my teachers or even any of my own peers. So in today's video, I want to remedy that situation by showing you a real life example of what a composer can make as a living today. Now, before we start, I want to make it crystal clear that not every single dollar I generate comes purely from the act of composing music. And I'm here to tell you that that is perfectly okay. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee that there are literally a handful of composers living today on this earth that are making all their money from composing purely original music for the concert hall. So with that being said, let's go over a more realistic portfolio of income streams that involve what I call living a more complete musical life. Let's begin with my first income stream, digital products. So this is a new one for me. I created a list of 50 music composition schools that you can study at in the United States that offer bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees. And I decided to make this spreadsheet available over on buymeacoffee.com for $5. So about a dozen people or so have purchased that so far. And if you want to do so as well, I have the link of that down in the description below. And so far, this has netted me $43.36. My second stream of income actually has to do with what you're watching right now. This is going to be my YouTube ad revenue. So in the year 2023, actually really it's just been the last couple of months or so, I've generated $122.27. So of course, those two income streams have much to do with this YouTube channel and my online presence in general. And as you can see, it's really not that much when you add them all up. It's like less than $200. So let's move on to our third income stream, and that's going to be my residencies. In this case, a residency involves giving a lecture of some kind to students at a school. So in this calendar year, I actually was paid $500 for 2 visits for a total of $1,000 for my 2 lectures over at the Harlem School of the Arts in Manhattan. Looking back, I really enjoyed my residency over at that school because I realized that these really young students, these students that are much younger actually than the students that I usually deal with on a day-to-day basis, they really had no idea at all of what a composer is. And when I was explaining to them kind of the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis, they seem to be really excited by that possibility. So I hope to do more of these kind of residencies in the future. My fourth stream of income are music sales. Now this boils down to 2 major categories: sheet music and rentals. Now sheet music, of course, is going to be my existing catalog that just exists on my hard drive. These are going to be pieces like my saxophone sonata, my violin sonata, my various solo pieces, my string quartets, etc. Usually what happens is a performer or an organization would contact me and say, hey, I want to perform XYZ piece at a concert. And then they would fill out an order form, and then that would send them the PDF of that piece. So that's a fairly straightforward transaction. Rentals, on the other hand, have to do with orchestral performances. So for example, when the Louisville Orchestra performed my Minara earlier this year, they had to actually request a rental quote for that particular piece. They would pay me whatever that rental quote is that we decided on. Then I would send them the music, and then after they performed the piece, they would send the parts back. I actually made a video about what it was like to receive my parts from the LA Phil just this past week. So if you want to go and see that, I actually have it linked up somewhere above here. So altogether, my music sales added up to $1,276.33. Now my fifth income stream, which is really not an income stream that has anything to do with composing music, but one I felt that is important to mention, is selling all that used gear that you don't use anymore. So this used gear ended up being these 4 Apple products that I just don't use anymore. So I ended up getting a good value for them at $1,329. Now let's head to my sixth stream of income, which are my private composition lessons. So over the last 5 years or so, I've been helping both young composers get into programs, undergraduate, master's, doctorate programs in composition, as well as composers that are just interested in composing and how to better their skills. Now, these lessons are tailored to each individual student. So for example, a student might be a little lacking on score study, or a student might be lacking on orchestration, orchestration or harmony or counterpoint. Or perhaps the student just needs a little bit of motivation every week or every other week to get through the next piece that they're writing. And sometimes it's just one comment that sets off a student to go into a direction that that person didn't think they would go into. And the whole point of these lessons is to figure out a way to engage that particular student, to figure out what is the next progression in their particular art form. Everybody is going to be a little different in this, so I have to figure out a way to tailor that for each individual student. And if you want to learn more about how you can join my composition studio, you can click on the link down in the description below. All in all, this revenue stream earned me $4,647. Moving on to our seventh income stream, royalties. Now, at least in the United States, the way royalties are collected are through what we call performing rights organizations. Here we have ASCAP and BMI. Now, the way this works is that public-facing businesses like bars, restaurants, or even concert halls like the Walt Disney Concert Hall, they would pay what we call a blanket license fee to basically cover any music that they would want to perform or play on their loudspeakers from both ASCAP and BMI composers. Now, this goes for songwriters like Taylor Swift, who is an ASCAP member, and film composers like John Williams, who is a BMI member. I myself am an ASCAP member who mainly collects royalties from my own concert hall performances of my own work. Now, the dollar amount I'm about to share with you actually reflects the performances that I had back in 2022. Usually there's about a year delay between when you have a performances and when you get the royalty check for that performance. So this number for 2023 ended up being $5,138.44. All right, now we're kind of getting into the big ticket items. This is going to be my eighth income stream, and that's going to be my commissions. This year I had 3 paid commissions. One of them was a 10-minute woodwind quintet that I wrote for the Imani Winds. Another one was a 5-minute kind of educational piece that I wrote for the Harlem School of the Arts. And the last commission that I worked on this year was a 10-minute full orchestra piece for the Los Angeles Philharmonic. So in total, this was 25 minutes of music, which netted me $27,000. Now, I know that this number might sound large on first glance, but trust me when I say that there is a lot of administrative work that goes into this. Of course, there's the composing work, there's the work that goes into engraving the piece, there's the work that goes into printing the music, of course, and there's, of course, the week of rehearsals where you're not being paid to be there, and the travel that's involved and the time away from other things that you're doing. So when you factor all these things together, really the amount of money that they're paying for this fee is a lot lower than what it probably should be, especially when you account for things like inflation, which has been ramping up like crazy in the last few years, and the cost of living in places like New York City and Los Angeles, where most of these composers actually end up living, at least here in the United States, at least. Now, this leads me to my ninth and final stream of income, which is where I spend probably 10 to 15 hours of my life a week, and that is teaching at the university. For the last few years, I've been teaching a class called Music Humanities at Columbia University. I absolutely love teaching this class because all the students in my class are undergraduates in fields like economics, political science, chemistry, art history, English, all these things that have nothing to do with music. Now, the goal with this class has nothing to do with music theory or orchestration, counterpoint, any of these things that I teach my private composition students. It's much more focused as a place where we are actually hearing music in a critical way and comparing and contrasting it to other music that has existed in history. It's actually a really fun class. We end up going on field trips to the Met Opera House. I've even taken my students to my own concerts. And generally speaking, I find that students taking this course end up telling me at the end, like, wow, I didn't realize that I would end up like any of this music that we had in this class. And actually, I have a better understanding of how the music that exists today in our world actually occurred, which is basically the whole point of the class. Now, the reason I'm sharing all this with you is to give you an idea that, yes, I identify as a composer, right? I am actively writing music that's getting performed and getting commissioned, but I value this part of my job as well, just as much, I would say, as actually writing. In fact, they work in symbiosis. It's very, very hard to lead a life as a composer, just living in this little, 10 by 10 kind of area. Composers, they have to get out in the world. They have to interact with other people, okay? It's not enough just to be on your own. Let's say I was getting 10 to 15 commissions a year. That would probably make it that I cannot teach at all. I cannot teach at the university, and I probably can't even teach privately. I think that would be a lot limiting as a composer. than if I was actually involved in these other things. I truly believe that, because as a composer, there's only so much information that I could already have in my brain and then process out as music. It's very difficult to just go year after year after year writing, let's say 10 to 15 pieces a year without having any new input. When you're having performances, this is just going to be basically an extrinsic thing. You're giving something to the world, you're giving your piece of music. But when you're teaching, for example, you're receiving just as much as you're giving, by the way. You're receiving all this input from students that as someone that's a little further along, probably didn't think about or maybe even overlooked. So for me, as a composer living what I call this complete musical life, I think it's just as important to be teaching music, that is, not teaching something else, but teaching music, right? Teaching something that has to do with my craft as a composer, as well as the commissions and the royalties and the sheet music sales and so on that come from the actual act of composing music itself. All right, so all in all, I earned $54,384 as a teacher at Columbia University. This brings us to a grand total of $94,940.40. If you want to break that down further, 59% of that income comes from my activities as a teacher at Columbia, and 41% come from my activities as a freelance composer, including my private composition lessons, my commission fees, etc. So I hope that gives you a realistic snapshot of what someone in their early 30s is making as a professional, let's say, composer. I would have loved to see a video like this even 15 years ago, but this is really the only video I'm aware of that is actually sharing any of these kinds of things. So I hope you got something out of it. Thank you so much for watching, and Happy New Year.